I want to introduce Susan Stimson, who's from the organizing committee and one of my very favorite people. Little quiz. What do Susan and I have in common? You can't say that we're both women or that we both worked at Guidant. We're both engineers by training. And I bring that out because one of the pieces of feedback that we've gotten in the past is like, wow, there's not enough discussion by technical people. That's always about sales and marketing or commercialization. Well, in reality, a lot of us that are discussing those things actually started our career on the technical side. So I'm trying to be more cognizant to point that out. So I'm going to ask Susan to introduce Erica Rogers, who's the CEO of Silk Road Medical, also one of my favorite people. And Eric and I have this funny thing, like we seem to run into each other like everywhere. We're always walking down the street in opposite directions at JP Morgan. We're always running to each other in the same places, which makes me think we're actually competing for the same money, by the way. And I do live in a little bit of fear of that because she's outstanding and that company is fantastic. So we're going to hear more about that. So without further ado, Susan, take it away.
Thanks so much, Deb. And today we have we're featuring Erica Rogers, as Deb mentioned, as our CEO interview, our executive interview for How Did She Do That? And I'm so thrilled to have Erica here because she has truly blazed trails in medtech. She is continually taking on roles of big responsibility. She's taken big risk, and it's resulted in big change in our space. She's currently CEO of Silk Road Medical. But I wanted to walk through a little bit of how she got there. And then, of course, we're going to hear directly from her, especially in how she navigated and made those decisions. So Erica started her career in pharmaceutical sales.
That is true.
She spent then 12 years at Boston Scientific in roles of increasing responsibility in sales and marketing, and had a skyrocketing career at Boston Scientific before decided to jump ship and go into the venture world, and started as an entrepreneur in residence at 3 Arch Partners. It didn't take her there long before it brought her to founding her first company, co-founding her first company, Visiogen, and leading that company as CEO. Oh, wait a second.
Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, that's what it says in the program. And Erica specifically mentioned she does not want to take credit for that. She was COO, so involved similarly in all aspects of building that company.
I got promoted to CEO of Visiogen.
But it wasn't long after that when she actually did become CEO of her next company. After that one, by the way, had a very successful exit selling to Abbott Medical Optics. She founded Lux Medical.
Yep.
And worked at building that company through the clinical stage, and then had to make a tough decision in that situation to close the doors. We're going to hear about that as well. She then took a role as COO of a pharmaceutical company, and not your standard pharmaceutical, a nonprofit pharmaceutical company that provided access and drug development specifically for pharmaceuticals to help for women's health. After that, she then came to her current role, and oh, by the way, she's got 5 issued and 15 pending patents, plays a number of different advisory roles, especially in championing women in leadership positions. And I'm just thrilled. That's enough about hearing from me. We want to hear from you, Erica, but thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Oh, my God. Huge honor. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I couldn't be more thrilled to be here, and I feel like I'm in just the most amazing company. I look out at this brilliant audience and all of these brains in this room, and I'm super honored to be here. So it's my pleasure to share my story, and I look forward to the interaction.
Excellent. I want to start a little bit on, early on, you had navigated this tremendous career within a large medical device organization. Something I think a lot of people are working on here in this audience. Before we get to some of the future roles, can you talk a little bit about when you were there at that time, What were you thinking about your career? How did you identify what you wanted to do? And then how did you navigate that in that large organization?
Yeah, so it's interesting, you know, I came up through the sales ranks. And by the way, Deb, I am a scientist by training, so there you go. But I carried the bag. How many people carried the bag? Sold product in the field to doctors, right? Or nurses or anyone else in the healthcare continuum. So I started out carrying the bag as a sales rep for MedtechVision, which was one of the divisions of what became Boston Scientific, and this is how old I am, embarrassingly. I was there the day Boston Scientific went public and became Boston Scientific. So I knew that I wanted to get into a place of real influence. I wanted to be the person who was pulling on bigger levers to make decisions around what products we were bringing to market, what was important to patients and providers. And as a sales rep, you know, you have some influence. You have a lot of influence in your own territory, right? And you can really move the needle that way. But I think it takes getting deeper into the organization. And for me, that pathway was through sales leadership and then ultimately into marketing. And then inside the marketing organization, trying to figure out what it meant to be a product leader or project manager. And I know companies have their hierarchy in very different ways. Sometimes project management comes out of R&D, sometimes it comes out of marketing, sometimes it's both. But making sure that I was on these cross-functional teams early, and we're gonna talk about this theme of kind of cross-functional knowledge and how do you build and amass that cross-functional knowledge throughout your career. Well, it starts with these early marketing roles of sitting on these teams and observing what your colleagues across the table who are in clinical and regulatory and quality and R&D and everywhere else in manufacturing are doing. And so for me, there were certain kind of geographic limitations. I was married to a man at the time who wasn't excited about moving to Boston. So there was only so much I could do, and I ended up at Target Therapeutics, which is, of course, here in the Bay, taking on market development, putting aneurysm coiling on the map, which was probably one of the most pivotal moments of my career, because this was a time when aneurysm coiling was kind of unheard of. And Target Therapeutics got this 510K out of nowhere. And it sort of surprised us how easily we got that 510K, right? And so we were a little bit unprepared. I think there were, 10 guys in the world who could coil an aneurysm at that time. And so my job was to figure out how to get 50 or 100% of aneurysms considered for endovascular treatment. And that was this just giant market development role, which exposed me to this whole other world of marketing, which is how do you develop a market where none exists? How do you go into a complete white space opportunity and figure out how to create that from nothing, literally nothing? And all the barriers to that of neurosurgeons owning the patient. They were doing aneurysm clipping surgery at the time. They made a lot of money doing that. It was a well worked out procedure. It resulted in reasonable outcomes and certainly protection against a rupture, further rupture of an aneurysm in the future. And here we were with this brand new technology that was basically unproven. So I think, thematically, it's kind of figuring out how one can move up the chain to have more and more and more influence, because in the end, I think we're all drawn to this business because we want to make an impact in the world, and we want to do something important in healthcare. If we weren't those kinds of people, we'd be down the street working on some app, and we'd be a lot wealthier, and I'd have better shoes. But that's healthcare.
I like to point out that Erica's shoes rock, by the way.
I modeled these after Holly. Holly's my shoe diva right there.
And when you were, you're identifying, these areas and seeing areas where you can carve out more and more exposure, more and more responsibility. How did you make that happen? Who did you tell? How did you get the buy-in, especially, moving in and, sales to marketing or different levels of marketing responsibility? How did you earn the right to be able to do that internally?
Well, that is a great question. I basically didn't tell too many people, especially in the beginning, because it was a very, very male-dominated space. One could argue still is, but we're making tremendous headway. As a sales rep at MedtechVision, this is no joke, had to wear a skirt with a suit, suit with a skirt at the booth, And you had two choices for blouse. You could have white or blue. So clearly, I never got out of the mold and still in a white shirt. So things were really prescriptive back then, and there were no kind of role models to figure out certainly as a woman, but period, how was I going to navigate all of that? So I kind of kept it to myself. But what I did was begin a lifetime of being courageous and kind of sticking my neck out and saying things in meetings, becoming known for having an opinion, becoming known for having done some research on whatever topic was going to be discussed, for taking on things that no one else was doing. Right? There were these vacuums of stuff that wasn't happening, particularly in the market development role, that no one was even thinking about. And so I just started doing that stuff. I didn't really ask for permission and didn't really grab onto someone who was kind of above me. That said, there were later in my career some very influential people who knew exactly what I was trying to do with my career. People like Jeannie Delagardelle, who's a well-known venture person in the Valley. So people like that, I did start to tell them, look, this is where I want to go ultimately. And I didn't set out to say I want to be the CEO. I just set out to say I want to have more influence about what the company is doing, and I want to have more influence about what's happening at the patient level. And I felt like the only way to do that was to get more and more responsibility.
And you mentioned Jeannie in the venture world, and moving on then to, the decision to leave a very solid career on a very nice trajectory at Boston Scientific to go into the venture world. Was she part of that? Did you know her then?
Well, I did know Jeannie then, and she actually did introduce me to the folks, to Mark Wan and others at Three Arch Partners at that time, and some of you who are in the front row here who know those folks. First of all, why did I make that leap? The primary answer is I didn't think I would get asked twice. This was like, for me, winning the lottery. It's like the venture capital, the leading venture capital firm in the Valley calls you up and says, we'd like you to come be an entrepreneur in residence. And you say, are you sure you got the right person? Are you talking, right? I'll take it. It actually wasn't that simple. So I loved the job I had at the then Target, which was now inside Boston at this time that we're talking about in history. And I loved the job I was doing because we were making headway. We had gone from 2% of aneurysms in the world were treated endovascularly to we were about up to 15 or 20%. Of course, today I think the number is 60. So, but we were making real progress, and I was known, really well known in the neurovascular space. And I was going to take this giant leap of faith and go be an entrepreneur in residence and incubate. What the hell is that? Like, nobody incubates at Boston Scientific. That's what chickens do. And get eggs from that. So you're going to incubate these ideas, and then we hope you'll form a company. What do I know about forming a company? Absolutely nothing. So I had a couple of folks who were very influential. Eric Engelson, incredible entrepreneur, Jeannie Delagardelle, others. I'm on the phone with them. What should I do? I love my career at Boston. I've got this amazing opportunity. And one of them asked me the question and said, Erica, if 100% of every brain aneurysm in the world was coiled instead of clipped, what would happen to the Boston Scientific stock? And I said, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because it was the era of drug-eluting stents. Nobody cared. Nobody cared if we were going to coil 100% of the aneurysms or 10% of the aneurysms. And that guy who asked me that question said, if you really want to make an impact, and you want to put your money where your mouth is, or your mouth where your money is, or wherever, however that goes, you should take this job. Because you will have more influence than you have at Target Therapeutics. And that's how it happened. So I took this giant leap of faith and went to Three Arch Partners.
Wow. And what did you want to be growing up? Like, what did you think you were doing?
Okay. What did I want to be growing up? I was going to be a Broadway star, which is why I want to stand up and tap dance for you right now, but I won't. Truly, I was going to be a Broadway star. This is a true story. And I started college. I chose my college because they had a degree in musical theater And I started as a musical theater major and ended up a zoologist and a biochemist. So the moral of the story is if you have a child who is about to go to college or in college, and I have some stepkids in that category, and they tell you they want to be a painter or an artist or a whatever, and you're thinking they're going to starve to death, it's okay. Let them go find themselves. They'll figure it out. Yeah, yeah.
I love it. So you got out into the startup world and had some tremendous successes and some tremendous learnings, and worked your way to the stage where you are now, or maybe 4 years ago when you're considering a new CEO role.
Yeah.
At this stage in your career, what were your decision factors in choosing to be the CEO of Silk Road Medical? I've obviously have a wide range of opportunities. Like now, what do you look for, and how do you make that decision?
It's such a great question. By the way, you're such a great interviewer. Isn't she amazing? Truly. You could be like Barbara Wellers. So there's a little bit of context, and the context is I was the founder and CEO of a company called Alex Medical. We were in the ENT space. We crashed and burned in 2008, and I had to stand in front of a company of 30 some odd people and lay them all off and close the doors, which is a devastating experience. But I learned more from that than I learned from my entire career combined. The failures teach us so much, and so please embrace them when they come your way, and say, all right, I'm a cyclist now, and I climb steep hills on my bike, and I just go, okay, this is good for me. These hills are good for me. These challenges, the failures, they're good for you. You learn and you strengthen through those failures. So I knew a couple of things. One is venture capital is tricky and fickle, and they will blow with the wind. And so I was a little bit of a victim of that, because 2008 was, of course, the economic Armageddon, and raising capital was impossible. And we had some, marginal sort of weirdness in our clinical data, and it was going to be really hard. So fast forward to your question. I'm going to get to it, I promise.
No, great.
So fast forward to your question, which is, I was running a nonprofit pharmaceutical company called Medicines 360, which is still alive and well and amazing today, I'm proud to say. And we were funded by philanthropy, by one of the richest, family foundations in the country. And I had hundreds of millions of dollars at my disposal. There was no problem raising money. And I had all kinds of giant levers I could pull, because I was connected to a whole different world than I'd ever been connected to, and kind of the venture-backed. So I said to myself, I will never go back to a role where I am in the position of begging for money. And I am having to put people's lives at stake, the people who work for me at stake, to blow with the wind, the economic winds. And so I was happily doing Medicines 360 when the phone call rang, my phone rang and said, please consider this job as CEO of Silk Road. And the first words out of their mouth were, it's a company working on carotid artery stenting. I said, goodbye. Like, no way. Does anybody know how much roadkill there is in carotid artery stenting? A lot of roadkill, right? So I'm like, goodbye. So then they call me back, no, just come have the conversation. Well, I'm a firm believer in always have the conversation, by the way. I think thematically, no matter who is calling you, high, low, wherever they are in the world, take the call, take the conversation. Always spend 15 minutes on a phone call. It's not going to cost you anything, and you might learn something, and you might make an amazing connection. So that is thematically something I've done through my whole life, and I did that. In this case, and I'm talking to Noah Knopf, who was one of the partners then at Warburg Pincus, private equity. Okay, that's different than venture. How is that different? I didn't really know. He explained it to me from a funding perspective. And then he explained what the technology is and what they were trying to do. And here's a fatal flaw of mine. I am drawn to impossible things. Like we're gonna do something no one's ever done. We're gonna do it with a whole different customer base, and we're gonna open up this whole new market where one's never existed, and it's this giant white space. No one's ever done it before, and there are no role models and no one to follow. I'll take that job.
I'm in.
Seriously, it's a flaw. So it's that hooked me. we're gonna try to finally crack the nut on carotid arteries, which is the last artery in the body that has not gone endovascular. So I said, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna take that job, and that's how it happened. And being backed by Warburg Pincus and private equity is a very luxurious place to be, and it's a very different fundraising paradigm. It's not like it's easy, but it is less. There are less unknowns, fewer uncertainties. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And
are my answers like way too long? Probably. Okay.
No, they're not at all.
Okay.
Anybody? I have to say, we could
just do this
all day long. I have there's so much to learn from you. Then you're coming in as CEO. To a new company, and I know you've got some very strong convictions surrounding culture, and not surprisingly, given all your leadership experiences. So talk about what's important to you in a culture, and then a little bit of, especially when you come in, not this time as founding CEO, but taking over as CEO, how you influence that coming in where there's presumably already a culture established.
Great question. So imagine interviewing for a job where you're not allowed to meet a single person who's going to report to you. You're not allowed to get your hands on the technology. You're not allowed to go into the building. You're not allowed to see what your office is going to look like, because it was all done behind the scenes because they were replacing an existing CEO. So I walk in the first day to a room of people and I say, I'm the new CEO. And I'm automatically hated because the guy that they loved is out the door, right? So I'm starting from a really bad place. But in terms of what my vision always is and what it is for Silk Road today, and was on that first day, was to build a culture where people were free to take risk, free to say what's on their mind, free to explore their own bravery, to say and do what they think is the right thing to do. And there is one thing that prevents that from happening in corporate America, in small companies, in big companies, in many of the companies that you all work in, and that is fear. If I'm too brave, Sandra Les Enfants, where is she? Sandra Les Enfants told her very brave story, 2 years of incredible bravery of always saying what was on her mind at the risk of losing her job, every time knowing she might lose her job. That is very rare. And to build that kind of culture, you have to remove blame. You have to remove the finger pointing. Well, she said that, and he said this, and behind the scenes, we're talking about so-and-so. All of that blame culture, especially when it's at the top, you have CEOs and you have VPs who are blaming each other, or they're getting blamed, or they want to pass the blame downhill, and the first thing the CEO says when something goes wrong is, who said that? Who made that decision? And then they single out that person. They say, you there, you're fired because you made this wrong decision, right? So there's this fear culture. Well, I walked into fear on steroids at Silk Road, where it kind of came down from the top, but also partially through the investors who are dear friends, and I love them all. But there was definitely a fear culture at Silk Road. And so how do you take that fear culture and turn it around to a culture of openness and sharing and bravery and saying what's on your mind and being able to have a respectful disagreement and dialogue with someone in the room without pointing fingers? So first of all, you have to talk about what you want to do and what your vision is. But secondly, you have to live it every day. And you cannot for 1 second break your own rule and blame anyone for anything. And you have to talk about it as a collective decision-making process, and you have to take on the collective responsibility. And then what I found out is that there were several people who did not want to go on this journey, and who love to gossip, and who love to blame, and who love to play the shame game, I call it. Others have called it, have written about it. I didn't invent that shame game, but thank God that phrase was coined, because that's really what it is. It's a shame game. And if I can shame you more than I shame myself, I somehow am elevated. So I had to strategically, surgically remove, one by one, the people who would not come on this journey with me and replace them with people who would. And so we turned over half of Silk Road Medical, and now I have the best organization, bar none, in medical devices. The only ones that compare are the other two that I built from scratch, some of whom are in this room. No, seriously. So we have an absolutely phenomenal place to work where you can't wait to go to work every day. Because people are in it, they're super in it, and they share their ideas and their, and one of the other, I think, tenets of me as a leader is don't hold all the power and information to the vest. In fact, the most powerful I can be is when I spread out all the knowledge that I have to everyone else that works for me. And in fact, if they have more knowledge than me, even better. Because then I look fantastic, especially when I have a whole bunch of really smart people working for me. So it's a matter of kind of spreading that feeling of information and power. And if you walk into Silk Road today and you go up to an operator in the clean room and you say, what is the long-term vision of Silk Road? They will know exactly what it is. And if you say, and what is your particular role in the long-term vision of Silk Road? They will know.
Love it. Love it. I think everybody who doesn't want to work for Erica.
Oh, good, because we have so much to do.
Who does want to work for Erica?
We have so much to do and so many companies to build, so let's, it's going to be amazing. Let's do it.
So that leads me to, so that sounds like a real, I mean, you've got to walk in there day one, without having met anyone and just like get ready for that day.
Yeah.
What's your pump-up song?
Oh, pump-up song. Okay. Okay, so you know I'm a complete nerd. I think we've established that. So my pump-up song comes from the musical Pippin. And it's called, raise your hand if you know this song, Corner of the Sky. No. Oh, yay! There's one person in two. Corner of the Sky. Corner of the Sky. Why do I love Corner of the Sky? I love Corner of the Sky because there is a line in Corner of the Sky that says, eagles belong where they can fly, which is one of my mottos. And so when I drive to the office, I sing. Who doesn't sing in the car? Because you're like fronting your own rock band in the car.
Broadway's a goal.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, there we go.
Well, okay. And then my second pump-up song is More Than a Feeling, which is also very nerdy from Boston. There you go.
I love it.
So embarrassing.
So, you've talked about, how to influence culture as CEO. Let's say, you're, and maybe step back a little bit, you're not CEO, but you really want to influence culture. So it's not necessarily your call, but, who wouldn't want to work in that environment of, no blame, no shame, right? How would you think about that if, you're, maybe mid-tier, any role in the company? How would you work to change that or influence it?
It's a very, very good question. And I've been in that position more than once in my career where it is all about blame. And it's all about, how can I step on the person beside me or below me to get ahead and all of that. And those are tough challenges to overcome. So first of all, read the book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown, who ended up researching the things that I've been living in my life and put a lot of the words to what I'm telling you. And so I've been able to borrow from her phraseology because she's so good at it. And I'm a TEDster and she's a TEDster. And she's amazing. Anyway, so read the book, Daring Greatly. It talks a lot about that, how to dare greatly when you're in an environment that doesn't allow you to dare greatly, right? So the first thing I would say is don't take the bait. How many times have you had a colleague come up to you and want to start going, Susan in quality, I'm just like, I am so sick of her nitpicking and like this Kappa thing. I'm like, I'm done with the whole thing, Kappa thing. Like, can we just, like the due dates are kind of unrealistic, right? So, right, who loves Kappas in this room? Me. Anyway, so there's always someone who's going to bait you and who's going to want to degrade the culture and say, isn't it bad how this is working, or isn't that person bad, or whatever. Don't take the bait. Absolutely do not engage in that conversation. So when that person goes up to you, don't you hate Susan over in quality and the Kappa thing, isn't it making you crazy? No, I believe in Kappas and quality infrastructure because I believe it leads to better products. Boy, she will shut up in 1 nanosecond, right? Because the truth is you do believe in high quality products, and the truth is you do believe in the Kappa system, and maybe it's being executed not all that greatly, and by the way, it's a pain in the neck and nobody loves it, but it's part of what we do. So don't take the bait. If someone's trying to drag you into that, and don't be the bait. Don't be the person who's doing that behind the scenes, right? And it's the old adage that our grandmothers all taught us: if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Well, there's truth in that, right? And grab onto what you do love about the culture that you're in. So if there's a particular leader that you really admire, or there's a colleague that you are like, wow, I really like what she's doing over there, pay attention to that. Learn from what's good and what's right. The products are working, right? Customers love, the dogs are eating the dog food. That's good too, right? All of you are working in companies where physicians are buying your products. So that's really good. So look at that stuff and figure out, how can I take that one little building block, the one thing that I feel good about in my department or in my job, I can add one more thing onto that and one more thing onto that, slowly, slowly, slowly. And then you'll be known for the person who is upholding that value in your group.
Love it. We're going to bring up questions in a couple of minutes. But I did want to bring in, our theme of global med tech. And Silk Road Medical is focused on the U.S. market.
Yeah.
And I think we heard a lot today about, when you're trying to figure out what markets outside the U.S. to play in, go in, get entrenched, really learn about that market. And that is very sound advice. And I think that's the way everybody would love to do that. You don't always have that luxury in a venture-funded startup.
Yeah.
No matter who's backing you, you always have to make choices without maybe having gone and spent all that time. So how are you thinking about OUS market, and how, what's driving your decisions of where to expend efforts and where not to?
It's a great question, and I was really interested in the prior panel, and people like Cecile and Rushka, I thought, really summed it up well from a sort of larger company or public company perspective, who have a whole lot more levers to pull on than Little Silk Road does. And when you are equity backed, you have to be super careful with your capital and how are you deploying that. And so, the first and foremost thing that we do, and one of the women said this on the prior panel, which is think about who are the key opinion leaders in the geographies that we ultimately want to influence. So if Silk Road is ultimately a public company and we have more capital than we have now to deploy, what are the countries that we'll ultimately be interested in? And for us, that's China, Japan, certain of the European geographies, Brazil, Mexico, and the usual lineup. So can we influence key opinion leaders in those geographies? Because that's pretty free to do. You can attend some local or regional meetings. You can get to know who are the influencers. In our case, it's vascular surgeons or neurosurgeons in the case of Japan. So who are those key leaders? How can we bring them into the fold? And one of the things that we've done in Europe is we have brought in very key opinion leading physicians into US clinical trials. So if we're running a trial in the United States, we'll add a key site in Germany, for example, and have that physician be an author on the paper, which is important because it spreads the news about what you're doing without having to spend the capital to put infrastructure on the ground in Europe. So we look at it as a can we do this in even a break-even kind of way? And so if we can get to some break-even math that works in any of these geographies, then we're likely to deploy and put some people there and try to actually commercialize. If we can't get to break even, we don't do it. We give the products away because it's actually cheaper to give them away for free to key opinion leaders, get them motivated and interested in using the technology and writing about it, than it is to build the infrastructure.
Excellent. Thanks. Well, I want to take a break here and see what questions exist in the audience. I know perhaps there's some in the app or come on, whomever.
Should we
Throw
take
'em out
the
there.
app first?
Can you hear me now?
Tell me your name.
My name is Nita. I work for Intuitive Surgical. We make Da Vinci robots.
Hi, Nita.
Hi. I really liked your concept when you talked about the non-blame environment, because I think that's a really strong way of breeding innovations, and we do that a lot in where I work. The question that I had for you at other companies that I worked in, one of the key things was, how do you get away from the having too much of a consensus-based environment and slower decision-making versus making sure that you have a balance in giving enough reward so that people dare to do something different?
Oh, that is such a great question. By the way, say hi to Catherine Moore. She's amazing. Brilliant, brilliant female leader, Catherine Moore at Intuitive Surgical and at Tedster as well. So I think, you know, I guess the thing that I think about the most is if I can make sure that everyone is heard, right? So there's consensus driven and then there's kind of hearing, right? And those are very different things. And so if I'm sitting around with a group of my team, I want to be sure that I hear everybody's point of view. But make no mistake, I am actually George Bush in disguise because I am the decider. So I think, you know, there has to be a decider, and you do have to get to swift decision making, and you're not always going to make everybody happy. And swift decision making in large companies is very hard to get to, right? And if I were back in a large company right now, I would try to hasten the listening process and be sure that there were deciders who could make the swift decision. That's one of the best things about being in an early stage company is you can make a decision in 5 minutes, right? You bring the senior team, you're all sitting around a room, let's do this, and we're doing it by noon, right? Hard to do inside Boston or Medtronic or any of the rest. So there's a difference between hearing and listening and consensus. And believe me, it is not always about consensus at Silk Road, because there has to be a decider who has taken in everyone's consideration. Hopefully that answered your question, Nita. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. Excellent.
I have another question from the app here.
Oh, from the app? Great.
From
Hi,
the
app. Nice to meet you.
Humanized app here. So this is piggybacking off the blame game culture, which I think is really interesting to a lot of people. But this particular question is around when something goes wrong and there really was a mistake, how do you fix it without the blame game?
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, Brene talks about this. There is a difference between blame and responsibility, right? And this is also something that is instilled in us as kids, right? You hear kids say a lot, "It wasn't my fault. It's not my fault," right? And that's the whole kind of blame and shame. It's like, it's not my fault, but it is your responsibility. And there's a difference between it's your fault and it's your responsibility. And so we always want to know who are the responsible parties so that we can intervene with those individuals and we can figure out how not to have this happen again. Right? But we approach it in a very different way, which is there's a group of people or a particular individual who's responsible for something that went wrong. And we sit down and we said, look, we were all in this together. We knew what we were getting into. We said we would execute it in X, Y, and Z. Maybe you did X, Y, and W instead of Z. And so we need to course correct right here. Right? So we're doing a lot of course correction. And believe me, I've had those very difficult conversations in my office where you're having to talk about this can't happen again. And we have to take personal responsibility for our actions, which is different than blame and different than, it wasn't my fault.
Excellent. More.
I have one more, if they're...
So this is a continuation on the theme question. My name is Kristen. Hi.
Hi, Kristen. Where do you work?
I work at Experian Group. It's a consulting.
Okay.
But in this notion around, you talked sort of about egalitarian culture and no shame, no blame, and consensus building and other things. But I'm really interested in, you just talked about responsibility. How do you think about representing accountability as a leader? how do you own accountability? How do you communicate accountability from your point of view, so that people working under you or with you sort of know how to process that in terms of their own experience too?
Oh, great question, Kristen. Thank you so very much for that. Hopefully, those of you that are in the audience and have worked for me in the past will agree with us. I am the first to stand up and say, I completely screwed up, guys. I made a big mistake. I listened to all of you. I decided to do this direction or that direction, and I was wrong. And here's what we're going to do about it. It's as simple as that. Stand up and say you're wrong when you're wrong, because I'm wrong a lot. There you go. Did that answer your question? Okay, but Kristen, there was a little nugget in your question that I wanted to tease out too, which was you were saying it's about consensus building and it wasn't collaboration. What was the other word that you used that I wanted to? Not accountability. Egalitarian. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. What's your name?
Awesome.
Azadeh. I've met you before. Azadeh. Got it. Egalitarian. I'm not talking about egalitarian. So let's be clear. This is not everyone is equal in the room, right? I'm the boss. I'm the decider. In the end, and and I mean that in the most blameless way and loving way and all that. But egalitarianism is not the same as we're not all equal. We all have different levels of responsibility. And by the way, if the company unravels and falls apart, and I've wasted the over $80 million that I've raised, there's only one person accountable for that, and that's going to be me. And so that puts me at a very different level of decision making and accountability. And so it is not egalitarian. What it means is that everyone gets to be heard. And if they have an opinion and they have a voice, I'm going to hear it, right? And if you're really smart as a leader, you will surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, some of whom are in this room, Kathy over there, PhD and a million other letters after her name. Bring people like that onto your team who are way smarter than you are. And they will help you make better decisions. But in the end, we're not all equal. Somebody has to be in charge.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we are out of time, and I wish we weren't, because I know there is so many more areas that we can dive into. We didn't even get to your superpower.
Oh, my superpower.
But we can cut it off unless anybody wants to hear superpower. Okay.
Okay,
you had one superpower.
It's so easy. If math were a superpower, that would be my superpower. Like, I suck at math. Suck. And I need that as a superpower. Okay, done.
All right, excellent. Well, Erica, thank you so very much.
I don't even know where to begin to reiterate something, Erica. I think the shoes are unforgettable. But I think this notion that, I don't think we use the word transparency, but everything you talked about was this sense of transparency in the culture and your leadership style. And I know personally for me, that's a really big one. I want people to tell me the stuff that I don't want to know. And I want to be able to tell people sometimes the stuff that they may not want to know. Because you know what? Growing companies, growing new divisions of companies, growing market share in globally public, conglomerate, no matter how big the company is, that is all hard, and growing things is uncomfortable. And so transparency in a time of being uncomfortable, I think is critical to creating a culture that you're talking about. So thank you, Erica. You've given us yet another year of memorable CEO discussion. And I'll see you in the hallway of the next event that we'll be both raising money at. So.